Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel, or if you're new here, welcome. I'm the Jawnz. Today, I want to tell you a story, because I know there are a lot of people out there struggling, and I'm hoping that this might be the final thread that you need to walk in the light of the Lord. But before we get all black man preacher, this will be a lot of science. As the French chemist Louis Pasteur once said, a little science distances you from God, but a lot of science brings you nearer to Him. And today that encapsulates our story perfectly. From education in primary school to more in-depth experiences later in life at the church, my rational brain still prevailed. Through science, physics, fractals and geometry, I chased my own explanations for creation. It felt intellectually safe, but it left me wondering, lost for years. As a child, I was very anti-establishment and carried those characteristics over to today. And this is another element that led me to my faith. Literally because of my own stubbornness. I've always seen the world as a web of lies, even as a child, with the truth always hidden. Through me being unbelievably stubborn and rebellious, yet always seeking truth, this was the final nail in the cross, so to speak. I hope you enjoy this video. First, we're going to look at the monetary system, how it started, how it evolved, and why the modern version feels like a rigged game designed to keep the average person down while the elites thrive. I'll break it down step by step from ancient barter to today's fiat currency and reveal how key events like the Great Depression were engineered to centralize control. We'll explore the motivations behind these shifts, the economic implications, and the power dynamics of play, shedding light on how money was transformed from a simple tool of exchange into a mechanism of control. Let's get into it. Our story begins thousands of years ago with the earliest forms of exchange. As far back as 30,000 BC, early humans traded goods and services directly through barter, swapping items like tools, food, or livestock without any intermediary medium. This system, which dates back tens of thousands of years to hunter-gatherer societies, relied heavily on a double coincidence of wants. For a trade to happen, you had to have exactly what I wanted, and vice versa, at the right time and place. It was inherently inefficient and limited, especially as societies grew more complex with specializations of labor. Think farmers needing tools from blacksmiths who might not want crops in return. Barter often led to cumbersome negotiations and delays, stifling economic growth in larger communities. Anthropologists point out that pure barter economies were actually rare in recorded history, challenging the simplistic narratives often taught in schools. Many early societies relied instead on gift economies or social obligations, where exchanges were based on relationships, trust, and reciprocal transactions, rather than strict quid pro quo. For instance, in tribal settings, giving a gift created a social debt that might be repaid later, fostering community bonds, but also introducing elements of hierarchy and obligation. This relational approach highlights how money's origins weren't just about efficiency, but also about power structures within groups. Those who could afford to give more often gained status or influence. As populations expanded and trade routes developed, these limitations became glaring, paving the way for more standardized systems. The rise of commodity money. Around 9000 to 6000 BC, as agriculture took root and permanent settlements formed, during the Neolithic Revolution, commodity money emerged as a natural evolution. Certain items became widely accepted for trade because of their inherent qualities: durability, divisibility, portability, and desirability. Livestock like cattle, sheep, and camels were often considered the oldest form of money, serving not just as a currency, but also as a measure of wealth in nomadic and pastoral societies. Grain, especially barley, were another staple, used for everything from paying workers to settling debts. In regions like Africa, Asia, and the Pacific, cowrie shells served as a currency as early as 1200 BC. Valued for their scarcity, beauty, and ease of transport, strings of shells could represent significant value without the bulk of larger items. By 3000 to 2000 BC, in ancient Mesopotamia, the shekel appeared as the first known unit of account, a standardized measure of value originally equivalent to about 160 grains of barley, which allowed for more precise accounting in trade and taxation. Silver, in forms like bars, rings, or coils, became a common medium of exchange, weighed out for each transaction using early scales, reducing disputes over value. Temples and palaces functioned as early banks, recording debts on clay tablets in uniform script, which acted as primitive ledgers. This system enabled large-scale trade networks, the collection of taxes to fund public works like irrigation systems, and even complex contracts for loans or labor. Importantly, money here wasn't just about physical exchange. It became a tool for tracking debit and credit, moving beyond simple barter to a more abstract concept of value. This shift allows societies like the Sumerians to build empires, but it also introduced risks like debt peonage, where individuals could become trapped in cycles of owing more than they could repay, foreshadowing modern financial inequalities. The breakthrough, coined money. The next big leap came around 650 to 600 BC in the kingdom of Lydia, where King Elates minted the first coins from electrum, a natural gold-silver alloy found in local rivers. These were standardized metal pieces stamped with a lion's head to guarantee weight and purity by royal authority, making trade more reliable and efficient by eliminating the need to weigh metals every time. This innovation spread quickly through Greek city-states and the Persian Empire, facilitating international commerce along trade routes such as the Silk Road. Around the same time, China independently developed early metal coins, often cast in bronze and square holes for stringing, used in the Zhou dynasty to standardize payments and reduce counterfeiting. What ties all this together? Early money was always backed by something tangible, a commodity like gold, silver, barley, or livestock that had real-world utility or scarcity. Even clay tablets or notes were just reminders of debts owed, ultimately linked to real value that could be redeemed or used. But as we'll see, this foundation started to erode over centuries, leading to the abstract debt-based system we have today, where money's value is detached from physical assets and increasingly reliant on institutional trust and manipulation. This transition wasn't just technological. It reflected growing state power, as governments could now control minting and debase currencies by reducing precious metal content, subtly inflating economies to fund wars or expansions. Modern money, physical versus speculative. If you tally up all the physical banknotes and coins in the world, it's about 9 trillion US dollars. A relatively small pool of tangible currency that you could theoretically hold in your hand. But when you include stocks, bonds, dividends, derivatives, and other speculative assets in global financial markets, the total balloons to between 600 and 1,000 trillion dollars. That's a massive gap, and it highlights how most money today isn't tangible. It's digital entries in ledgers, speculative valuations driven by market sentiment, and fundamentally tied to debt rather than intrinsic worth. This explosion in speculative wealth has accelerated with digital trading platforms and high-frequency algorithms, creating volatility that benefits insiders with access to information and leverage. Our entire monetary system is debt-based, operating through fractional reserve banking, where banks create money by lending out deposits multiple times over. Every dollar in circulation originates from a loan issued by a bank or central authority, and every loan comes with interest that must be repaid on top of the principal. If everyone paid off their debts tomorrow, there'd be no dollars left. Zero. Because the money supply is literally the sum of outstanding debts. But the interest? There's never enough money created to cover it all, as new money only enters the system through more loans. It doesn't exist in the system initially, creating a perpetual cycle of debt that keeps expanding through inflation, borrowing, and economic growth mandates. This isn't an accident. It is by design, engineered by central banks and financial elites to ensure constant expansion, which disproportionately benefits those who can borrow cheaply and invest in appreciating assets, widening the wealth gap. Take billionaires like Elon Musk as a prime example. They don't take traditional salaries that trigger high income taxes. They take stocks and options tied to company performance. Then they borrow against those assets at low interest rates, using the loans as spending money. A bank sees Tesla stock valued at, say, $1 trillion on paper, based on market hype and future projections, and issues a massive loan collateralized by those shares. That's the real money they spend on yachts, ventures, or influence, all while avoiding income taxes because loans aren't considered taxable income. Leftists scream, tax the rich, but these elites aren't earning taxable income in conventional sense. It's all speculative, a fugazi, as they say in Wolf of Wall Street, built on perceived value rather than cash flows. They're gaming the system while the rest of us pay the price through higher taxes, inflation eroding savings, and stagnant wages in a debt-fueled economy. Engineering the system, from gold standard to fiat. To understand how we got here, let's trace the US story in more detail. For much of the 19th and early 20th centuries, the US operated on a gold standard. Currency was directly convertible to a fixed amount of gold, limiting the money supply to available reserves and promoting fiscal discipline. This aimed for stability by preventing rampant inflation, but caused rigidity, deflation during gold shortages, squeezed debtors, and the system was inflexible in economic crises, leading to recessions where gold inflows slowed. Recurrent banking panics like the severe one in 1907, triggered by failed speculative bets and bank runs, exposed the flaws in a decentralized system. There was no central authority to manage currency flows or act as a lender of last resort to inject liquidity. So in 1913, Congress passed the Federal Reserve Act signed by President Woodrow Wilson on December 23rd, amid secretive negotiations involving powerful bankers like J.P. Morgan. This created the Federal Reserve as the US central bank, a quasi-private entity owned by member banks, tasked with providing an elastic currency that could expand or contract as needed, supervising banks to prevent failures, and stabilizing the system through interest rate adjustments. Initially, Federal Reserve notes were partially backed by gold, maintaining some commodity link. But critics argue this was engineered from the start as a power grab. The Fed was sold to the public as a solution to prevent crashes and democratize finance, yet it set the stage for more centralized control by a small group of insiders. Enter the Great Depression, which began with the 1929 stock market crash and lasted through the 1930s, marked by widespread unemployment, bank failures, and deflation. The gold standard worsened it by constraining the money supply amid bank runs. People hoarded gold, further tightening credit. In 1933, President Franklin D. Roosevelt issued Executive Order 6102, banning private gold ownership and forcing citizens to exchange gold for paper currency at $20.67 per ounce, under threat of fines or imprisonment. The Gold Reserve Act of 1934 then revalued gold from $20.67 to $35 per ounce, effectively devaluing the dollar by 40% and letting the Fed expand the money supply through increased reserves. Domestic gold convertibility ended, shifting full control to the government, though international ties lingered for foreign entities. After World War II, the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944, negotiated by 44 allied nations, pegged global currencies to the US dollar, with the dollar convertible to gold at $35 per ounce for foreign central banks only. This made the dollar the world's reserve currency, facilitating post-war reconstruction and US economic dominance. It worked at first, but by the 1960s, US trade deficits from importing goods, massive Vietnam War spending, and domestic inflation from Great Society programs strained the system, the Triffin dilemma, where the US had to run deficits to provide global liquidity, but those deficits eroded confidence in the dollar's gold backing. Foreign nations like France under Charles de Gaulle and Britain redeemed dollars for gold, draining US reserves from over 20,000 tons post-World War II to under 9,000 tons by 1971. On August 15, 1971, President Richard Nixon suspended dollar-to-gold convertibility in a televised address, closing the gold window, imposing temporary wage price controls to curb inflation, and adding import surcharges to protect US industries. By 1973, major currencies floated freely against each other, and the dollar became fully fiat, backed only by government trust, legal tender laws, and the strength of the US economy, not a commodity. This Nixon shock marked the end of commodity money globally, enabling unlimited money printing, but also hyperinflation risks, as seen in the 1970s oil crisis. How the Great Depression was engineered. Many believe the Great Depression was deliberately triggered, or at least allowed to spiral, to justify the Fed's expansion and consolidate financial power. A key tool in this alleged scheme? Call loans, also known as broker loans. These were short-term loans from banks, corporations, and even foreign lenders to stockbrokers, who in turn lent to retail investors, buying stocks on margin, putting down just 10 or 20% cash and borrowing the rest to amplify gains. Call loans were callable on demand. Lenders could demand full repayment within 24 hours, creating inherent instability. By 1929, broker loans hit over $8.5 billion, more than all US currency in circulation at the time, fueling a massive stock bubble in the Roaring Twenties, driven by post-World War I optimism, easy credit, and speculative mania in industries like automobiles and radio. Interest rates on these loans soared to 12 to 20%, and banks lent aggressively for profit, ignoring risks. When stocks peaked in September 1929 and started failing due to overvaluation and economic slowdowns, margin accounts dipped below requirements. Brokers issued margin calls, forcing investors to add cash or sell stocks immediately, which depressed prices further in a vicious cycle. Lenders panicked and called in loans en masse, triggering forced sales on Black Thursday and Black Tuesday. When the Dow Jones plunged 23% in 2 days, prices plummeted, wiping
The market
out billions
crash wasn't
in
random.
paper wealth.
It was
eroding
amplified
consumer
by
and
this
business
risky debt
confidence,
field
and
speculation,
crippling banks,
which some
holding
say was
devalued
allowed or
collateral.
encouraged by Fed policies that kept
The crash
interest rates
wasn't
low
random.
in the
It was
1920s.
amplified by this risky debt field speculation, which some say was allowed or encouraged by Fed policies that kept interest rates low in the 1920s to aid European recovery, only to hike them abruptly in 1928 and 1929. Conspiracy theorists point to figures like the House of Morgan, who allegedly profited from the chaos and pushed for reforms that strengthened the Fed, arguing it was a manufactured crisis to dismantle decentralized banking and usher in a more controllable system. A failing system. Once you grasp the math, every dollar is debt, plus interest that can never be fully repaid because the system only creates principal, not the extra for interest. You see, it's a Ponzi-like scheme, requiring constant new debt to function. It's controlled by elites, central bankers, Wall Street tycoons, and policymakers to suppress the masses, ensuring endless economic growth through borrowing while they borrow against illusions of wealth like inflated stock valuations or real estate bubbles. We've gone from money tied to real commodities, which impose natural limits and accountability, to a fiat farce, where trust in governments and institutions is its only backing, vulnerable to erosion through mismanagement or geopolitical shifts. The system perpetuates inequality. The wealthy access cheap credit to invest, while average people face high-interest consumer debt. It fuels boom-bust cycles, environmental degradation from growth imperatives, and global instability as nations compete for reserve currency status. Critics argue it's unsustainable, pointing to rising national debts, cryptocurrency alternatives, challenging fiat and potential resets like central bank digital currencies that could enable even more surveillance and control. Understanding this history empowers us to question the status quo and seek reforms. But until then, the game remains rigged in favor of those whom designed it. Today, we're diving into one of the most pivotal events in modern history, the attacks of September 11, 2001. What unfolded that day wasn't just a tragedy, it was a turning point that reshaped global politics, security, and our trust in the institutions that claim to protect us. But as we'll explore, the official story fed to us by the mass media might be hiding a much darker truth. First, let's recap the official account of what happened that morning. On September 11, 2001, 19 hijackers affiliated with the Islamist extremist group Al-Qaeda, led by Osama bin Laden, carried out a coordinated suicide attack on the United States. These men, mostly from Saudi Arabia, had entered the US legally in the years leading up to the attacks. They trained at flight schools across the country, learning just enough to pilot commercial jets, not to land them, but to turn them into weapons. Armed with simple tools like box cutters, knives, and mace, items that slipped through pre-9/11 airport security, which didn't screen carry-ons for such threats. They hijacked 4 planes. The timeline unfolded like this. At 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 slammed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center in New York City. Just 17 minutes later, at 9:03 a.m., United Airlines Flight 175 hit the South Tower. Then, at 9:37 a.m., American Airlines Flight 77 crashed into the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. The 4th plane, United Airlines Flight 93, went down in a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania. At 10:03 a.m., after passengers heroically fought back against the hijackers. The South Tower collapsed at 9:59 a.m., followed by the North Tower at 10:28 a.m. And let's not forget World Trade Center Building 7, which mysteriously fell at 5:20 p.m. that afternoon, even though it wasn't hit by a plane. In total, these attacks claimed the lives of 2,977 innocent people, not including the hijackers, and injured thousands more. First responders rushed into the burning towers, saving lives at the cost of their own. The strikes targeted symbols of American power, the economic might of the World Trade Center, the military strength of the Pentagon, and possibly the political heart in DC. This event forever changed air travel, sparked endless wars, and eroded our sense of security worldwide. Now that's the story we've all been told, the one repeated endlessly by governments and mainstream media. But here's where things get interesting. Over the years, more and more people have started questioning this narrative, and for good reason. It's widely accepted that 9/11 was a false flag operation, an inside job designed to justify invading Iraq, seizing control of oil resources, and enriching powerful interests. Think about it. The US went to war with the Middle East shortly after, toppling regimes and securing massive profits for defense contractors and oil companies. Billions in government debt and questionable finance records stored in the Pentagon and World Trade Center buildings vanished in the rubble. One of the biggest red flags is the collapse of the towers themselves. Architects and engineers who designed the World Trade Center claimed that the buildings were built to withstand multiple impacts from large aircraft like Boeing 747s. Yet they came down in a way that looks exactly like a controlled demolition.
If you watch the footage closely, you'll see the structures crumpling inward with what appear to be a sequential explosions on every floor. Not the pancake collapse theory pushed by officials, where floors supposedly stacked on each other due to fire and impact damage. No, these buildings fell at near freefall speed, defying physics unless explosives were involved. And Building 7, it wasn't even struck by a plane, but it imploded symmetrically hours later. Fires alone don't do that. Not in steel-framed skyscrapers. Then there's the no planes theory. Some folks argue the impacts were faked with holograms or missile disguised as aircraft. Not really fully sold on that one. The eyewitness accounts and videos seem to show real planes, but it raises questions about what we really saw that day. More damning is the evidence of foreknowledge. In the days before 9/11, there were unusual insider trading, massive put options placed on American and United Airlines shares. Who knew to profit from the coming disaster? And rumours persist that certain people were warned not to show up for work. Entire floors reportedly empty, with stories of anonymous phone calls tipping off employees. I've even heard this firsthand through a friend of a friend. Someone got a weird call that morning and called in sick. Good thing they did, right? These aren't isolated claims. Similar stories have circulated for years. Don't forget the connections at the top. The Bush family had long-standing business ties with the Bin Ladens, Osama's own relatives. And allegations of Israeli or Mossad involvement, reports of dancing Israelis filming the attack and celebrating, plus claims that Jewish employees were warned in advance. If Al-Qaeda was the sole perpetrator, why do these threads keep leading back to insiders? The events of 9/11 were real. People died, buildings fell, and the world changed. But the story behind it? The one spun by mass media and governments. That's where the lies come in. Time and time again, we've seen how narratives are crafted to manipulate us, to justify wars, control resources, and silence dissent. We all sense it deep down, but it's time to act on it. So what can we do? Start questioning everything. Hold those in power accountable. Demand transparency from judges who release dangerous people on bail without good reason. Flood politicians with emails, social media pressure, and Freedom of Information Act requests to expose the truth. Don't just consume media, dissect it. I think it's pretty well known and accepted now that 9/11 was a false flag. Definitely an excuse to go into Iraq and wage war there and take the oil. People made a lot of money, and I also think that a lot of debt sort of just vanished overnight, like government debt too. There were several conspiracy theories. The first one, and I think that's the most damning, is that basically they were just a controlled demolition. Engineers of the building said that they could withstand multiple 747 collisions and still survive. And if you look at, the pancake theory and like the buildings and how they sort of crumple in on themselves, with periodic detonations happening on every floor of the internal structure, and then it basically falls at the rate of gravity. So I don't really think this is a conspiracy theory. I think this is pretty damning to me. But there are some people that believe that there were no planes. I'm not too fantasized by that one. But yeah, it was obviously an inside job. Bush had relationships with bin Laden and his father as well. And people say there was Israeli and Mossad involvement. There was insider trading, bets on stock drops on American and United Airlines. I also heard rumors that entire floors of the building did not attend work that day. Got an anonymous phone call that morning. This was corroborated by a friend of a friend. Actually, I heard that one of their friends had got a weird phone call that morning and just called in sick. And good thing they did. But there was a lot that we could go into, but I'm not here to go into conspiracy theories. The point that I'm trying to make is that whatever happens in the world, we know that the events are real, but the story behind them is not, and it's never true. And I think we all sort of know this, but we really need to start exercising it. We need to hold judges accountable for releasing people on bail. We need to put pressure on politicians through social media and through emails and freedom of information requests. And I think that really we all need to work together as citizens to really make a better country for ourselves.
The more you begin to investigate what we think we understand, where we came from, what we think we're doing, the more you begin to see we've been lied to. We've been lied to by every institution. What makes you think for 1 minute that the religious institution is the only one that's never been touched? The religious institutions of this world are at the bottom of the dirt. The religious institutions in this world are put there by the same people who gave you your government, your corrupt education, to set up your international banking cartels. We have been misled away from the true and divine presence in the universe that men have called God. I don't know what God is, but I know what he isn't. And unless and until you are prepared to look at the whole truth, and wherever it may go, whoever it may lead to, the more you educate yourself, the more you understand where things come from, the more obvious things become, and you begin to see lies everywhere. You have to know the truth and seek the truth, and the truth will set you free.
To think of religion, I think we should think of it in the most easiest sense that we can, and that would be the sun. As far back as 10,000 BC, history is abundant with carvings and writings reflecting people's respect and adoration for this object. And it was simple to understand why, as every morning the sun would rise, bringing vision, warmth and security, saving man from the cold, blind, predator-filled darkness of the night. Without it, the cultures understood, the crops would not grow, and life on the planet would not survive. These realities made the sun the most adored object of all time. Likewise, they were also very aware of the stars. The tracking of the stars allowed them to recognize and anticipate events which occurred over long periods of time, such as eclipses and full moons. They in turn catalogued celestial groups into what we know today as constellations. This is the cross of the zodiac, one of the oldest conceptual images in human history. It reflects the sun as it passes figuratively through the 12 major constellations over the course of a year. It also reflects the 12 months of the year, the 4 seasons, and the solstices, and equinoxes. The term zodiac relates to the fact that constellations were anthropomorphized or personified as figures or animals. In other words, the early civilizations did not just follow the sun and stars, they personified them with elaborate myths involving their movements and relationships. The sun, with its life-giving and saving qualities, was personified as a representative of the unseen creator or God, God's Son, the light of the world, the savior of humankind. Likewise, the 12 constellations represented places of travel for God's Son and were identified by names, usually representing elements of nature that happened during that period of time. For example, Aquarius, the water bearer, who brings the spring rains. Horus, he is the sun, god of Egypt of around 3000 BC. He is the sun anthropomorphized, and his life is a series of allegorical myths involving the sun's movement in the sky. From the ancient hieroglyphics in Egypt, we know much about the solar messiah. For instance, Horus, being the sun or the light, had an enemy known as Set, and Set was the personification of the darkness or night. And metaphorically speaking, every morning Horus would win the battle against Set, while in the evening Set would conquer Horus and send him into the underworld. It is important to note that dark versus light, or good versus evil, is one of the most ubiquitous mythological dualities ever known, and is still expressed on many levels to this day. Broadly speaking, the story of Horus is as follows. Horus was born on December 25th of the Virgin Isis Mary. His birth was accompanied by a star in the east, and upon his birth he was adored by 3 kings. At the age of 12, he was a prodigal child teacher, and at the age of 30, he was baptized by a figure known as Anup, and thus began his ministry. Horus had 12 disciples he travelled about with, performing miracles such as healing the sick and walking on water. Horus was known by many gestural names such as the Truth, the Light, God's Anointed Son, the Good Shepherd, the Lamb of God, and many others. After being betrayed by Typhon, Horus was crucified, buried for 3 days, and thus resurrected. So obviously there's a lot of similarities between the story of Horus and the story of Jesus. Krishnu, Mithras, Osiris, Krishna. There's so many different ones that adhere to this. The list that I have in front of me is not as detailed. But continue with the script. And I want to shout out this original Zeitgeist movie for this because I tried to write my own, and the way he's just so articulate. So I have to give a shout out to that. First of all, the birth sequence is completely astrological. The star in the east is Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, which on December 24th aligns with the 3 brightest stars in Orion's belt. These 3 bright stars, Orion's belt, are called today what they were called in ancient times, the 3 kings. And the 3 kings and the brightest star Sirius all point to the place of the sunrise on December 25th. This is why the 3 kings follow the star in the east, in order to locate the sunrise, the birth of the sun. The Virgin Mary is the constellation Virgo, also known as Virgo the Virgin. Virgo in Latin means virgin. Virgo is also referred to as the house of bread, and the representation of Virgo is a virgin holding a sheaf of wheat. This house of bread and its symbol of wheat represents August and September, the time of harvest. In turn, Bethlehem in fact literally translates to house of bread. Bethlehem is thus a reference to the constellation Virgo, a place in the sky, not on Earth. There is another very interesting phenomenon that occurs around December 25th, or the winter solstice. From the summer solstice to the winter solstice, the days become shorter and colder. From the perspective of the northern hemisphere, the sun appears to move south and get smaller and more scarce, the shortening of days and the expiration of crops. When approaching the winter solstice, symbolized the process of death to the ancients. It was the death of the sun. By December 22nd, the sun's demise was fully realized, for the sun, having moved south continually for 6 months, makes it to its lowest point in the sky. Here, a curious thing occurs. The sun stops moving south, at least perceivably, for 3 days. During this 3-day pause, the sun resides in the vicinity of the Southern Cross or Crux constellation. And after this time, on December 25th, the sun moves 1 degree, this time north, foreshadowing longer days, warmth, and spring. And thus it was said, the sun died on the cross. So, I think it's quite interesting, all of the correlations, and you can see the kind of journey that I was on. I was seeking truth and understanding. Unfortunately, it kind of moved me away from Jesus, or even further away. There's a story to tell here, and we're going to tell it later in the video. When we come full circle on this, it was clear that I was pushed away and tested, and I think that because of this, my faith now is so much stronger. Today we're going to be looking at a lecture by Nassim Haramein. At age 7, Haramein had an esoteric experience that convinced him reality is just a tiny slice of something bigger. Like the visible spectrum amid vast invisible wavelengths, by age 10, in his first geometry class, he got excited when the teacher announced they'd learn about dimensions. He thought, finally, someone will explain these other worlds I sense. But he was disappointed. The teacher drew a dot. 0 dimensions doesn't exist. Then the teacher drew a line. 1 dimension, no volume, doesn't exist. A plane. 2 dimensions. Still no volume. Doesn't exist. Then stacked planes into a cube. 3 dimensions. And he said, this is where you exist. Haramein calls this a mystery cube. Logically, if nothing exists in lower dimensions, stacking them shouldn't create existence. It's just non-existence to the 4th power. This riddle, he says, is ancient, mentioned in Middle Eastern manuscripts, and it's distorted modern physics and society. Buckminster Fuller had the same issue in school. Haramein spent his 90-minute bus ride home obsessing over it, vowing to solve dimensions before getting off. In a meditative visualization, Haramein expanded his mind. The bus became a dot, Earth became a dot, the solar system a dot, the galaxy a dot. Then he zoomed inwards. His hand made of dots, cells, or atoms of particles. This revealed the universe's fractal nature. Dots within dots to infinity. It's all dots. Point contains the whole. All information is available at every point. Points connect everything, arranging to form reality. But his mum burst his bubble when he excitedly told her, each point has infinite energy and information. She, being a practical Italian woman, said, I don't feel infinite today. Go and do your homework. This crushed him. How can a finite boundary contain infinity? He realized the error. We see infinity and finiteness as opposites, not complements. Kids intuitively grasp an infinitely big and small universe, nested forever, until school teaches it otherwise. Haramein demonstrates geometrically how infinity fits in a finite space via fractals. Draw a circle, or a sphere in 3D, inscribe an equilateral triangle, or tetrahedron. The universe is polarized, so positive and negative, male and female. And then we subdivide, connect midpoints, creating smaller triangles, and repeat infinitely. In a finite boundary, you get infinite divisions, proving infinity and finiteness complement each other. This geometry organizes reality everywhere. He discusses vectors, equilibrium, and how ancient civilizations knew this. The vacuum isn't empty, it's full of energy. Black holes, gravitational forces, and dimensions tie into his unified theory, linking quantum to cosmic scales. Space is curved, creating vortices. A 2D sine wave is a 3D vortex. When self-organized, it quantizes. Particles emerge from waves naturally. No wave-particle duality dilemma. They're unified in 3D vortices. He demonstrates with a string attached to a motor in water. It forms stable waves, particles, and fractal patterns. Disrupt it, and it rebalances. This string theory, his own pun, shows frequency, amplitude, and radius. Dictate resonance, constructive or destructive. Planets orbit suns. Suns, galaxies. Galaxies, clusters, infinity. In an infinite fractal of rotations, every point is the center. You are the universe's center. Spins cancel out, creating stillness, singularity, like a hurricane's eye. 100-mile-an-hour winds outside, calm inside. Stillness provides reference for motion, the same way that you need silence for music to cut through. Galaxies also follow this. Massive black holes at centers, points of stillness where spins cancel. Haramein predicted, 12 years prior in 1999, every galaxy has one, He got kicked out of conferences. Recent Hubble data confirmed supermassive black holes at every galaxy's heart, challenging cosmology. They're the brightest objects from external radiation, yet black inside. Vortices match electron clouds, subatomic particles, and mesons, vector equilibrium. At large scales, supernova explosions form intersecting rings like petals, predicted by his geometry. One even has an Eye of Horus in the middle. Crop circles show similar patterns, hinting at vacuum structure. Haramein ties it to consciousness. The vacuum structure generates reality. Ancient texts and biology reflect this fractal. His theories unify fields explaining black holes, gravity, and dimensions. Metal-like intersecting rings in supernovae aren't random chaos. They match the exact geometry he derives for the vacuum. Polarized spheres dividing into tetrahedrons, creating fractal, holographic structure. He excitedly points out that crop circles often depict this same pattern, suggesting intelligent encoding of spacetime's fundamental geometry. Maybe some call it God. Same geometry appears in electron probability clouds, subatomic particles, and even biological forms. Everything from quasars to quarks follows this nested toroidal, donut-shaped vortex flow centered by a singularity, what we call a black hole at larger scales. Black holes aren't rare or destructive endpoints. They're the organizing heart of all systems. Supermassive ones anchor galaxies. Haramein extends this fractally downward. Stars, like our Sun, may harbour mini black holes at their cores, explaining anomalies like the corona being millions of degrees hotter than the surface. Counterintuitive in standard models, but natural if a spinning black hole drives plasma vortices. When we zoom in smaller, the proton itself behaves like a microscopic, Schwarzschild black hole. Haramein walks through his famous calculation. When you account for vacuum energy density inside the proton volume using Planck units, the mass matches the observed proton mass almost exactly, solving the strong force mystery. Gravity, not just the strong nuclear force, binds quarks and protons via spacetime curvature from vacuum fluctuations. This unifies gravity with quantum mechanics, no need for exotic particles or strings. He stresses reality is a hologram. Information of the whole universe is encoded on every surface, or the event horizon of every black hole entity, from cosmic to atomic. Ancient cultures weren't primitive. They encoded this physics in monuments and texts. Egyptian hieroglyphs, Mayan temples, and Stonehenge align with cosmic proportions. This Great Pyramid's dimensions ratio to Earth's, and its internal geometry reflects the same flower of life pattern from his vacuum model. Discusses the Star of David, two overlapping tetrahedrons inside a circle. Perfect double polarity, expansion and contraction, radiative and gravitational forces in balance. This Merkaba symbol represents the light body or vehicle for consciousness traversal through dimensions. Multiple sites worldwide show evidence of advanced knowledge, precise machining of stone, astronomical alignments predicting precision, and art depicting energy fields around bodies, like halos or auras. The Knights Templar, for instance, during the Crusades, discovered forbidden texts and artifacts under the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, likely Solomon's temple ruins. These included ancient Egyptian, Essene, and possibly Atlantean knowledge of unified physics, alchemy, and consciousness as the creator. The Templars grew powerful, developing banking and architecture, incorporating sacred geometry. Church and monarchy saw them as a threat. On Friday the 13th, 1307, they were massacred, knowledge suppressed. Haramein suggests surviving Templars influenced Freemasonry and early science. Echoes in symbols like the dollar bills, pyramid, and eye. Why suppress? This knowledge empowers individuals, understanding we're the centers of the universe, connected via consciousness to the infinite vacuum, dissolves hierarchy control. True unified physics implies free energy, healing, and interdimensional travel, threatening established power. Consciousness isn't emergent from brain chemistry, it's fundamental. Vacuum's fluctuating energy is the mind of God, structuring reality via observation. DNA's double helix is a 3D projection of the same polarized geometry cells divided fractally. Atomic bonds arise from shared electron black hole orbits. Everything radiates from singularity centers, balanced by inflow from the vacuum. We're entering an era where this ancient to future knowledge resurfaces. Solar activity spikes from 2003 to 2012 signal cosmic energy influx, awakening collective consciousness. Haramein's unified theory, black hole fractals, holographic mass, vacuum-driven forces, which is science and spirituality. Its intuitive, instinctive geometry kids grasp before schooling confuses them. Peer review was underway in 2003. His later papers build on this. So, here's just another quick visual representation of infinity within a finite space. So this is a computer program, and basically it never exceeds what we first saw on the first frame, but if you increase the resolution on the video, it goes in infinitely. I'm not sure exactly on how they wrote the code. This is something completely different. The Nassim Haramein actually references this in his talk, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, you can see that the original pattern kind of replicates as well. So yeah, another point that I want to mention is that how we're all the center of the universe is on a sphere. If you think about it, and you're looking at a single point, a single dot on that sphere, say a human being, relative to the rest of the sphere, that's the center, wherever you're looking at, right? And I know it sounds kind of corny, but if you move it to the next person, then the whole universe shifts a trillionth of a degree, and now you're looking at it from there. But on the sphere, now that's the center of it, wherever you're actually looking at. So yeah, I hope this kind of gives another bit of a visual representation of the fractal nature of the universe. So yeah, pretty dense stuff. That it definitely took me sort of it's a 7.5 hour lecture, and it took me, I had to watch about 3 times for it to sink in. So don't feel bad about it. I'm going to give you a couple of analogies that might help you sort of understand. So one of the things that he says is, he gets to university and he wants to know what an atom is, right? Because everything is made up of atoms. And if you can understand what one of them is, maybe we can understand what the rest of them are, right? So, his professor says, look, that's way too complicated for our first, sort of physics lesson. And actually, to tell you the truth, we don't fully know what an atom is, which is a bit confusing, because if you can't tell what an atom is, how can you tell what anything else is? But what the professor does say is that we do know that an atom is made up of 99.99999% space, or the vacuum, right? So this is what he sort of bases his investigation on. He wants to know, what is that empty space? Like, what is that? That seems to be most of the universe, is whatever that is. If everything's made up of atoms and atoms are empty space, then shouldn't we be looking at what the empty space is? Obviously we can't see it with our eyes. We can't see many things with our eyes. But what he believes is that the atoms are sort of vibrating at the speed of light, in and out and in and out, contraction and expansion, expansion and contraction, and we're sort of going into this 3D dimension and then out of it, like at the speed of light. We're doing this, right? So that's how, like, we have these intuitions, we have these other feelings, and it sort of explains a lot of like psychic kind of, a lot. It explains a lot. So we keep building bigger and bigger microscopes. We spend billions and hundreds of billions of dollars on these things to find smaller and smaller subatomic particles. And every bigger microscope that we build, we find smaller and smaller things. And if we understood this fractal nature of the universe, we wouldn't need to build these microscopes anymore, because we understand that infinity actually fits within that finite space, and infinite potential. So another analogy that I can use is, like a whirlpool. If you imagine just your swimming pool in the backyard, and there's a whirlpool there. However it's made, there's a whirlpool. The whirlpool, the vortice, the part that you can see spinning, is the expansion part of the universe, right? When we coming into reality, into that into that third dimension. But the rest of the pool, all of the other water, because the whirlpool's just very small, right? It's not a big thing. It doesn't cover the whole pool. It's just a part of the pool, in the middle of the pool, and it's just spinning. But what he wants to look at is all of the other water, not just the thing that we can see, that's visible to us. But he wants to look at all of the other water. And what he believes that this means is that we can just tap into energy, tap into the energy everywhere, and it's just infinite. We shouldn't be having to pay for power. We should be able to travel interdimensionally. Think about it, intergalactic travel. If we're able to travel at the speed of light, it's way too slow. Traveling at the speed of light is way too slow. There must be another way. I think in terms of space exploration, we really haven't moved past making fire. We build a big fire and we stick it under a rocket and we send it up. And I mean, obviously I know that there's a lot more to do with that, but the idea, the propulsion, the way that we're moving through the space and time is wrong. We're trying to like fight the vortex. We're trying to swim against it. We're not tapping into all the other still water that's around the whirlpool. So this is what he he knows that ancient cultures, and this is the flower of life symbol that we've been looking at, and I have tattooed onto me, because this taught me the fundamental shape, geometrical shape of that empty space, vacuum, of that 99.9% empty space in the atom. We know now that what it is, that geometrical shape of it. And that would be the first way. But obviously in the scientific community at the moment is just all wrong, because if you've spent your entire life researching and sticking to the one theory, you're not going to want to just throw your career away, get no more funding to allow another. It's been like this for so long, with Nikola Tesla and the Rothschilds, that they wanted the power lines to. Anyway, we're getting a little bit off topic here. I don't want to get too deep into the conspiracies. Haramein even goes into a lot of crop circles into this. I don't think I really want to touch on it, but that's something else that people should always look into, because it's not just teenagers out there stamping stuff in the fields. There's some energy or something else. He talks about messaging. There's messaging from another species, perhaps. Who knows? But anyway, I hope that maybe I've kind of explained to you what I've been just talking about, and what he's dedicated his life to. And for me, I want you to understand how this was my true explanation for God. I had moved away from the church and from God because I was very scientific and very rational, and I wanted facts and evidence, and I didn't even give Jesus at the time the amount of research that I gave to this. But I think even now, having this knowledge has brought me even closer to him, because it's the things that Nassim talks about is what Jesus talks about. This whole we're all connected and unified. Full lecture is still out there if you want to go to it. I recommend doing it in about hour-long segments. But yeah, it's a lot. He's a physicist, right? So there's a lot of that jargon. There's a lot of words there that we haven't heard before, and but I think that hopefully it's sort of clear that we all know that there's something else that's going on, whether we have faith in Jesus or other religions or not. Even if we're atheists, I think a lot of people just believe that there is some sort of other energy out there, something that's going on that we're not aware to at the moment. And this is the explanation. And I think that even with my faith, it's not like me following Jesus throws all of this out. This was the message that he left for us, the message that the ancients knew about. This is the message of creation, and it's in nature with the Fibonacci sequence, and it's just left everywhere. And I think a final point on faith here. I didn't want to touch too much on faith yet, because we will come to the faith side of things. But I believe that God, before Jesus came to earth, I think that God left this messaging for people to try and find him. And I think that he tried to show messaging in a lot of different ways. He had prophets, he had, the messaging in nature, in mathematics, in geometry, and in the stars, like so many different ways that he tried to give a message to us. And I think that it just continued to fail. It fell on deaf ears. And I think that that's why he had to send Jesus, because now Jesus is the incarnation of all of this. And now we know that was the final message, was Jesus. And it is the best one. It is the best one. But I think if you start to look for all of these things, you'll see Jesus is everywhere. And now I hope you understand how a little science might move you away from God, but a lot of science brings you back closer to him.